The story picks up at St. Midrigal Castle, a huge place with massive towers, and inside the main hall, our protagonist, Alsar, stands before the king and prince while guards line the room, and Alsar keeps it respectful, asking King Ogkarb what he wanted to talk about today since the king looks pretty stressed out. Calling Alsar by name and looking him right in the eye. Out of nowhere, the king asks Alsar if he's planning a rebellion, which totally catches Alsar off guard, and Alsar tries to laugh it off, asking what the king is even talking about. But the king just calls him out for playing dumb, saying it's a shame to see the hero who beat the Demon King acting like this. The king gets even louder, yelling that it's useless to hide it because everyone knows the former hero-turned-military instructor is planning a coup, so he might as well just give up right now. Alsar is standing there completely lost, thinking to himself that he has absolutely no clue where this is coming from or why the king thinks this. So he speaks up and says he has zero interest in a rebellion, especially since he spent the last 10 years just doing his job, training the kingdom's soldiers. He takes a look at the guards surrounding him and realizes they aren't even his guys. They're from a different unit, which explains why they're all giving off such a scary vibe. Alsar looks at the soldiers and thinks to himself that if these were actually his students, they'd never dream of trying to fight him, even if it meant their lives were on the line. But King Ogkarb cuts through his thoughts, pointing a finger and shouting that he has actual proof of Alsar's betrayal. The king announces that the testimony comes directly from his own son, Prince Jayakoza, who stands there looking cold and distant. Alsar is completely blown away by this, looking at the kid in total shock because he can't believe the prince would say something like that. He tries to laugh it off, waving his hands and telling the king there must be some kind of mistake, while secretly thinking back to how the king originally asked him to train the prince to be a strong leader. Yeah, even though Alsar always just saw the kid as a weak little beansprout. He stares at the prince, wondering what the hell is happening and noticing that the kid is wearing a weird earring that doesn't even suit him. Prince Giacosa finally speaks up, yelling at Alsar that he heard the plan to overthrow the kingdom with his own 2 ears. The king asks the traitor Alsar if he finally understands the situation, but Alsar just stands there looking annoyed and lets out a confused sound. Losing his patience, Alsar leans in with a scary look and asks the prince what he just said, reminding him that discipline in the military is the only thing that matters. Alsar gets way too intense and looms over the prince with a terrifying look, making the kid freak out. But then he catches himself and starts apologizing like crazy for overstepping. The prince finds his voice and starts screaming that he's the royalty here, demanding to know why Alsar isn't using any respect. So Alsar switches back to his formal tone and apologizes to His Highness, thinking to himself that he really should behave since everyone is watching. He tries to move the conversation along, telling the king it's a real shame to be called a traitor, while secretly thinking this kid is just a brat talking trash. The prince turns away, totally annoyed, and yells at Alsar for acting so high and mighty despite the accusations. Giacosa brings up a specific memory, or asking if Alsar remembers being asked if he could take over the whole country by himself. Alsar realizes he's talking about the party after their last training camp, and while the prince is shouting about treason, Alsar remembers the kid being a total lightweight, drunk, and crying about how no one could stop Alsar if he ever got serious. The prince keeps going, claiming Alsar bragged about needing less than half a day to wreck the place, even offering to give them a demo right then and there. Alsar just stands there and lets out a long sigh. When the prince asks what else that could possibly be if it's not treason, Alsar just tells him it's called a joke. He figures the whole thing is just one big, weird misunderstanding, so he bows low and tells the prince it was just some harmless talk over drinks. Jayokoza's face tenses up as he reaches his breaking point, looking like he's about to blow, and he finally loses it, screaming at Alsar to stop messing around while the instructor just stares back, totally stunned. The prince points a finger and yells that Alsar doesn't even know the difference between right and wrong, making Alsar wonder what's gotten into him. He looks at the kid and thinks to himself, wondering if the prince was always this quick to snap over nothing. But Jayakosa isn't done, shouting that he won't hear any excuses because the treason is basically a settled fact. King Ogkarb sits back on his throne and chimes in, saying he can't exactly look the other way now that his son has said all this. He looks right at Alsar and tells him there's no doubt he's planning a rebellion, leaving Alsar looking completely stressed. Alsar tries to step forward and pleads with the king to just wait a second so he can explain the misunderstanding. But the king just barks at him to shut his mouth, leaving him standing there in total silence. The king goes on, reminding him that he only got this high-ranking instructor job for beating the Demon King, and asks what he's actually done for the country lately. Alsar stands there frozen as the king calls him a total parasite, basically telling him he's useless to the kingdom now. He tries to tell himself that a military with nothing to do is actually a good thing, since it means the world is finally at peace and He thinks back to the days they risked everything to earn this quiet life, but looking at his face now, the reality of the situation is starting to sink in. The king stands up and shouts for everyone to hear, calling Alsar a traitor and sentencing him to death right then and there. Alsar looks back at the throne and asks if they've lost their minds, reminding them he's the hero who saved the entire human race. But the king just scoffs. The king tells him he's washed up, and Giacosa chimes in with a smug look, bringing up how Alsar once told him he'd surpass his old teacher. Our Alsar clenches his fist, thinking about how he only said that to be encouraging. He can't believe how full of himself the prince actually is. The king doubles down, saying that if a kid can catch up to him, then he was never a real hero to begin with, leaving Alsar just staring in total shock. He thinks back to when he first met the king at 13 years old, and wonders if the guy was always this much of an idiot. Giacosa starts laughing, saying his dad is totally right, and mocking Alsar for thinking he can actually take on a whole room of guards by himself. Alsar thinks back to when things were simple. He actually used to praise Giacosa because the kid worked so hard at training, and now it's obvious the prince is the one behind this whole mess. Alsar realizes they're just framing him for execution because they don't like him. He can't even believe things got this bad. He lets out a dry laugh because the whole situation is just that ridiculous, so he starts laughing out loud right in front of the throne. The king and Giacosa just sit there looking annoyed while he loses it, and the king asks if he's finally lost his mind. Giacosa points a finger and screams at him, demanding to know what's so funny. The guards get the order to surround him immediately. A bunch of guys with spears rush in from every side to pin him down, but Alsar just looks down and thinks about how stupid this all is. He's totally disgusted by the people he's standing in front of, and starts wondering if all the blood and sweat from his younger days was just a waste of time. He remembers the monsters he killed, thinking about his old friends and the people he protected back then. He asks himself if he really went through all that just to save losers like this, and the reality starts to hurt. He looks back on the life and death battles he fought and wonders if this pathetic future was even worth the effort. Alsar just starts walking away, and the pressure coming off him is so intense that the guards get blasted back like paper. Spears go flying and dudes are hitting the floor left and right while he doesn't even break his stride, so he stops for a second to look back at them. He's got this cold look in his eyes and tells them they really shouldn't have underestimated what a hero is capable of, because suddenly the entire room starts to shake. This massive wave of energy just pours out of him, making Giacosa and the king freak out as they realize they're in way over their heads, and the stone pillars actually start cracking from the weight of it. The king and the prince are pinned to the floor, gasping for air and trying to ask what the hell he just did to them, but Alsar just gives them this casual, almost bored smile. He tells them he didn't actually do anything to them, or rather, it's the exact opposite of what they think, so he explains that he just stopped holding back. For years, he's been using all his focus just to keep his power bottled up so he wouldn't hurt anyone nearby, but now he's just letting it flow, and he takes a slow step toward the throne. He asks them if they ever wondered why only 4 people were able to handle the front lines 10 years ago, leaving them staring at his glowing hand in total fear. He tells them it's because no one else could even survive being in the same room as him when he's not holding back this pressure, which makes the king and Giacosa look pretty pathetic while they're literally crawling on the floor. Alsar looks down at them and says, those old battles were basically worse than hell itself, but he reminds them that even when things were that insane, he and his crew just toughed it out. They gritted their teeth and stayed standing until the Demon King and his whole army were completely finished. Alsar gets real for a second, explaining that the title of hero wasn't just some fancy name. It was only given to the few people who could actually survive that level of combat. So he looks down at the king and tells him straight up that a normal person would literally drop dead just by standing in his presence. That's just the kind of monster he had to become to win, and he points out the obvious to Giacosa. There's absolutely no way a guy like him could ever stand a chance in a fight against the real deal, leaving Alsar just laughing in their faces. He's spent his whole life working as a reward for saving the world, and he finds it hilarious that they're calling him a traitor and a parasite now. But he gets serious again. Looking at King Ogkarb and telling him he was a fool for not realizing that just having Alsar around was the only thing keeping the neighboring kingdoms from attacking, so he stands over the pile of defeated guards with his arms out, asking the king if he finally understands that trying to execute him is a total waste of time because it's impossible. The king just stares at him, his eye twitching as the reality of the situation finally sinks in and he realizes how badly he messed up. Since the vibe is totally ruined, Alsar decides he's done with the whole thing. He tells them he's not feeling this job anymore, and he's officially quitting right now, but he kneels down to their level and reminds them that since this is a peaceful resignation, he's obviously going to need his full retirement payout before he leaves. He flashes a casual smile and a peace sign, remembering the original deal was 500 million, so he tells the shaking king he'll just take double that amount for his trouble. The king is totally losing it, asking Alsar if he's actually kidding with these demands. Alsar just flashes a huge, casual grin and holds up 3 fingers, telling him they should probably just triple the payout instead. And when the king starts grumbling under his breath about how much he hates this, Alsar doesn't skip a beat. He holds up a 4th finger, letting the guy know the price just went up to 4 times the original deal. The king is shaking so hard he can barely breathe, but Alsar gets dead serious, pointing a finger right at his face. He warns the king that if he makes him any angrier, things are going to get much worse, right as a tiny spark of energy pops from his fingertip. The king completely breaks, bowing his head and begging for forgiveness while agreeing to pay whatever Alsar wants. So Alsar just gives a satisfied nod. Prince Giacosa is on the floor sobbing like a baby while Alsar stands over the guards. He gives a little mock bow, telling them it's been a real pleasure working for them. Giacosa just sits there grinding his teeth, wishing he could do something but knowing he's completely outclassed. Giacosa finally finds his voice and starts screaming that he'll never forgive Alsar, calling him ungrateful and officially exiling him from the country. Alsar just keeps walking, saying he was planning on traveling anyway, so it's perfect timing. Giacosa keeps shouting like a loser, telling Alsar he'll make sure no other kingdom takes him in and hoping he dies in a ditch. But Alsar just casually kicks a spear off the floor while walking away. The spear flies at a crazy speed, grazing Giacosa's face and slamming into the wall with enough force to make the whole room shake, leaving the prince screaming in total terror. Alsar doesn't even bother looking back at him, just telling the guy to shut his mouth and watch him walk out the door. Alsar heads out the door, thinking to himself that this is definitely the worst way to quit a job. Behind him, the king just stands there in total silence, watching him leave without saying a single word. And the scene shifts over to the dormitory building where Alsar has been staying during his time as an instructor. He stands in his bedroom one last time, saying goodbye to the place before deciding it's finally time to pack since he's got all that severance money to carry, which turns out to be a massive pile of treasure chests and bags of gold. He wonders if he went a little overboard with the souvenirs, but figures it's fair since he didn't exactly quit on normal terms. Instead of carrying it all, he pulls up a glowing magic inventory screen and starts tossing everything in. He makes quick work of it, watching the swords, on gems, and heavy bags of cash disappear into the digital slots until the whole room is completely empty. He puts his hands on his hips and gives a satisfied nod, seeing that everything is finally ready to go. As he changes into his traveling gear, he thinks about how he really wanted to say goodbye to the people who helped him out here. But since he's officially in exile now, he realizes showing up might just cause them a lot of trouble, so he decides to just leave. He knows a few people might be pretty mad at him for ghosting them, but he hopes they'll eventually catch on to why he had to disappear. With everything settled, Alsar starts walking through the gardens toward the edge of the kingdom, casually wondering which direction he should even head first. Alsar looks up at the sky and realizes it's been forever since he actually traveled for fun. Since he spent a whole year straight hunting the Demon King, he figures he's due for a break, and a few faces of his old crew flash through his mind as he thinks about what it means to be back on the road. He makes up his mind right there, deciding his first move should be heading out to visit some of his old friends. But when he gets to the massive exit, 2 guards immediately step up and cross their spears to block his path. Alsar doesn't even slow down, just flat out tells the guys to open the gate and let him pass. The guards stand their ground and say they won't do it, explaining that General Val personally ordered them to keep the gates shut. Alsar sighs, knowing the general has a huge grudge against him. It's pretty clear the guy doesn't want a traitor getting a grand exit through the front doors, so Alsar tells them he'll just handle the doors himself. The guards barely have time to react before he takes a step forward, and he just blasts the giant gates wide open, knocking the guards back. The 2 guys are left shaking on the ground, completely losing it, as Alsar just waves goodbye and tells them he's heading out. Alsar walks across the long bridge, finally putting some distance between himself and the city. He takes one last look at the massive castle where he spent so many years, thinking to himself that he's never coming back to this place again. Everything's quiet until someone suddenly screams for him to wait. The heavy sound of hooves hitting the ground catches him off guard. General Val comes charging in on horseback with a squad of soldiers, yelling at Alsar and telling the guy he's going to kill him right here. It's a crazy shift from how things used to be, back when the Demon King showed up after 1,000 years, and everyone was terrified, looking for any kind of hope. The old legend said a hero would come from another world to save them all, and people started praying that the stories were actually true. Or that's when the prophecy finally kicked in, and 4 kids from another world were summoned straight to the castle to fight. There was the kid known as the Silver Hero leading the pack, followed by the girl they called the Azure Maid. and the White Priestess, who made up the rest of the legendary team meant to save the world. The last member of the group was known as the Diamond Warrior, and with the team finally ready, they all set off on the long journey to take down the Demon King. Back in the present, Alsar is trying to leave when a group of soldiers cuts him off, with someone yelling for the traitor to stop right there. General Valtal looks down with a serious face while Alsar just sighs, thinking about how he's already being called a traitor again. Alsar gives a casual smile and asks the general if he needs something, which really gets under the skin of the soldiers watching him. Valtal points out how calm he's acting, but Alsar just shrugs it off as a false accusation and starts to ask another question, noting that the general is dressed for a real fight and asking if he was actually sent here to take his head. Alsar laughs it off, and saying there's no way Prince Giacosa would ever give an order like that. But Valtal just looks away and says, "Of course he did." Hearing that it's a direct order from the prince makes Alsar drop to his knees, realizing that the threat he made earlier definitely backfired on him. Valtal keeps talking as he reaches for his weapon, mentioning that while the prince talked about exile, those were really just words, and as he draws his blade, he says death to all traitors is the only rule that never changes. Alsar stands there with a strange glow around him, wondering if these guys really think they can actually kill him. He realizes he's just done with this whole situation, rubbing his head and telling the general that if they're going to be like that, he's not going to hold back anymore either. Valtal looks completely lost, asking him what the hell he's even talking about, but Alsar just gives him a cold stare and tells him he's going to regret this until the day he dies. The general doesn't listen and charges straight at him on his horse, but right as he gets close, a massive blast of energy hits, sending the horses and soldiers flying into the air while they all scream in total shock. Alsar just stands there looking annoyed, complaining about how every person he runs into is exactly the same, wondering why the prince and the general think they can look down on him, and if they really have no clue what happened 10 years ago. He looks off into the distance, finally seeing the reality of how everyone treats him now, and realizes they really must have forgotten exactly what he's capable of. It's been so long since monsters were a threat that the whole world has gone soft, and everyone has completely forgotten what Alsar and his crew did for them. So he just stares them down, snaps his fingers, and decides if they've really forgotten that much, then he's just going to have to make them remember exactly who he is by letting off a massive beam of energy. The general loses his mind, calling Alsar a bastard and asking if he's actually going to fight back, telling him to just give up his head if he ever cared about the king. But Alsar just looks at him like he's crazy, asking what the hell he's even talking about before noticing something strange. He spots a little star-shaped light and thinks it looks familiar, but then he just brushes it off like it's probably nothing. Moving on, he brings up a grid to scan the castle, pinpointing exactly where everyone is inside. Then he points his finger back up, deciding that right down the middle is the best spot to hit. With one clean move, a massive horizontal cut slices right through the castle towers, and Alsar just casually kicks the air, watching as the entire top half of the building starts to slide off and crumble. Everything starts falling apart as the ground literally drops out from under the soldiers. General Valtal loses it, screaming at Alsar to tell him what he just did, but Alsar just stands there with his hands behind his head like he's on vacation. The general starts sliding backward fast, totally unable to stop himself as the top of the castle tower grinds along the cut and begins to fall, making everyone inside freak out and wonder what's going on. As the building slides away, Alsar gives a casual little wave and tells the general he'll see him later, while the guy can barely even get a word out, just staring back in shock as he drifts further and further down. Debris starts raining down everywhere and the general falls straight into the mess, but Alsar just floats there safely above the chaos. Eventually, the guy just face plants right into the water with a loud splash. Alsar checks his map and mentions that the life signs are all still there, so he didn't actually kill anyone. Then he just stands there among the ruins and sighs, thinking about what a pain this whole situation turned out to be. Alsar looks down at the mess he made, wondering why the king and prince used such a dumb excuse to try and kill him. General Valtal is still down in the water yelling threats, but Alsar just figures that since things ended up like this, he might as well own it. He lets out a long sigh while looking back at the smoking ruins of the castle, feeling a bit weird about how everything went down. Eventually, he decides to stop stressing over it since the whole situation is over anyway. He turns his back on the chaos and tells himself to just focus on getting out of there. But back at the castle, Prince Giacosa is absolutely losing his mind. He stares at the destroyed gate and bites his nails in a total rage, screaming about how much he hates Alsar. While the prince throws a tantrum, King Ogkarb sits on his throne in the middle of the wreckage looking pretty guilty. He asks if this was really the right move and calls out to a guy named Bolgan, who creeps out of the shadows behind the throne. This hooded guy just laughs it off and tells the king that everything is actually going perfectly. Bolgan talks trash about the Silver Hero title, calling Alsar a demon who brings bad luck wherever he goes. He keeps whispering in the king's ear, saying it was a great move to finally exile him, though the king doesn't look convinced at all. He starts to argue back, looking at the cracked walls and debris everywhere. He points out that because they tried to get rid of Alsar, the country has suffered damage they might never be able to fix. The king looks away, clearly regretting everything, and reminds Bolgan that he never wanted to do this in the first place. It wasn't just about the country. He knows they just betrayed the man who saved the whole world. Bolgan holds up a finger to his face, cutting the king off and telling him to quit talking nonsense. The hooded guy gestures toward Prince Gyokoza, saying that the kid's angry outburst is exactly the right way to react. The prince just keeps stomping his foot, cursing Alsar for being such a traitor while he continues his little tantrum. Bolgan keeps whispering in the king's ear, saying Alsar is just a criminal now and that nothing he did in the past matters anymore, so the king shouldn't let himself get confused. He looks down at the king and asks if he's really losing his nerve, but the king snaps back that Bolgan is the one confusing everyone. The king looks pretty stressed as he points out that they all just saw the Silver Hero's insane power with their own eyes. Yeah, he says if a guy like that is considered a useless bum, then everyone else in the world is even worse, and reminds Bolgan that this whole mess only happened because of the advice he gave. The king is shaking, knowing Alsar could have wiped them off the map if he felt like it, but Bolgan just laughs and says the hero doesn't have the guts to actually do it. With a creepy smile hiding under his hood, Bolgan mocks Alsar for having all that power for 10 years and still being a guy who never really achieved anything on his own. The king looks totally exhausted, telling Bolgan he has no clue how big of a deal it was to actually take down the Demon King. Suddenly, Prince Gyokoza interrupts the talk, screaming at the top of his lungs to bring him the foreign minister and every diplomat they have because he wants a warning sent out to every single country immediately. He's completely gone off the deep end, pointing into the distance and declaring that any nation caught hiding Alsar is officially declaring war. He's so blinded by hate that he promises to hunt them all down and destroy every country that stands with his former teacher. Bolgan tells the king not to sweat it, since the prince is clearly pumped up and ready to go. Gyokoza is in the back throwing a huge fit, but Bolgan just keeps talking, saying that even a hero who took down the Demon King can't stand a chance against 10,000 people. The king looks totally drained, asking Bolgan if he's happy now, but Bolgan just says this is only the beginning. He holds up his hand and explains that Alsar isn't the only problem they have to deal with, and mentions the other 3 heroes who helped kill the Demon King. He says, unless they kick them out or kill them all, the kingdom is doomed. The king just sits there in silence while he looks over at his son. Gyokoza has this nasty look on his face, totally different from how he used to be. The king remembers when the prince was just a happy kid who loved his dad and wanted to show him his books, which makes the current mess even harder to swallow. He holds his head in his hands, wondering how things got so bad. Bolgan just steps up and shouts to the crowd, telling everyone to get moving and keep hunting down the traitor Alsar. He tells them it doesn't matter if the guy hides in the clouds or the sea, they're going to follow him to the ends of the earth. Gyokoza looks out with a cold stare, vowing that he will definitely bury that traitor from the human world once and for all, making sure everyone knows they have nothing to worry about. Bolgan steps up and tells them that as the court magician, he's got their backs, and then he raises his hands high, acting all dramatic while shouting about how holy everything is and claiming that God has finally arrived. He tells the soldiers he hopes they have blessings on their path, which Gyokoza thinks is only natural given the mission. Gyokoza gets this intense, dark look in his eyes and says he's going to personally deliver the final blow to that evil traitor. He orders everyone to get ready for war, and as the soldiers start cheering, he yells that they're going to bring down divine judgment on Alsar. The king looks totally crushed by the situation, but he tells himself he'll put his whole soul into this for the sake of the kingdom's pride. Meanwhile, Alsar is actually looking pretty relaxed as he gets away, noting that that guy is the closest one to them right now, but back at the castle, Bolgan just stands there with a creepy grin, laughing quietly to himself because his plan is working perfectly. Alsar heads off the main path and into the brush. He made the right call since there isn't a soul around to stop his climb. Alsar keeps pushing himself up the steep mountainside, grabbing onto rocks and trees until he finally hits a flat spot and stops to catch his breath. Looking out at the sun setting over the water, he realizes he's not making it back today and says he'll just have to camp out at the summit. He starts daydreaming about how great it'll be to have a campfire and some coffee at the peak, thinking to himself that this kind of freedom is honestly the best. Something suddenly pops into his head. He wonders how she's doing and pulls up a glowing magic screen to check his messages. He thinks about Emirus and gets a bit annoyed when he sees that she's completely ghosting the magic message he sent her. He sighs to himself and says, she's such a lazy person, but his eyes show he's still thinking pretty deeply about her. Yeah, he notes that her personality traits are just like the pride and greed he carries around inside himself. And since sloth and cruelty are part of who Emirus is, he figures those parts of her must have a pretty massive influence on how she acts. He remembers how she actually used to be a really hard worker back then, but he stops dwelling on it and focuses on finishing his climb to the top. The scene shifts away from the mountain and goes back in time to 1 year before the Demon King was defeated. Emirus gives them a big smile and holds up a finger, telling the group she's actually going to grant them some magic. The White Priestess and the others look completely stunned, and they can't help but ask if she's actually serious about the magic part since Jayokoza always thought magic was a special thing only mages could do. Emirus just shrugs it off, saying they can handle the simple stuff because it's really just about tapping into the mana in the air, which leaves the Silver Hero and the Priestess super hyped. They both start begging her to teach them everything she knows right now. Giacosa stays chill and takes a sip of his coffee while asking what kind of magic they're even talking about, and Emirus holds up 2 fingers, explaining there are 2 main types they need to learn. He's starting with the first one called storage. It's a subspace trick where they can basically shove coins, food, and gear into a pocket dimension to keep things organized. The second type is telepathy, which lets the whole crew stay in contact and talk to each other's minds no matter where they are. Emirus explains that this telepathy works by mixing communication logic with something called Kimon, and the Silver Hero remembers hearing about that back when they were first summoned to the castle. She nods and tells him he's right on the money, explaining that this is what naturally happens whenever someone starts messing with logic or mana power. So she pulls up her sleeve to show them for real, revealing a glowing magic crest pulsing right on her arm as she demonstrates the power. The White Priestess thinks the glowing crest is beautiful, while Emirus explains that in a real fight, people can usually tell when an attack is coming. Because of that, there are special tricks used to hide those movements so the enemy stays guessing. The priestess then asks what the actual difference is between regular magic and these logic arts. So Emirus explains that magic comes from demons using mana, while logic arts were made by humans. The Silver Hero gets all hyped up and adds that logic arts are powered by the natural energy humans are born with, which actually surprises Emirus. She tells him he's smarter than he looks, but he doesn't appreciate the backhanded compliment at all. He brushes it off and brags about how he knows logic arts inside and out, even if he's clueless about demon magic. Meanwhile, the priestess is still totally lost and asks for a better explanation. The hero tries to act cool and strikes a pose, telling her that logic arts are simply the power to control the laws of the universe, but the explanation is so vague that it just makes Emirus stare at him like he's an idiot. He immediately folds and apologizes, admitting he only said that to sound cool. Emirus glares through her glasses and asks if he actually knows anything for real, which sends the kid into a total panic as he tries to prove himself. She takes over the lesson and explains that the world follows set rules, like stuff falling because of gravity or wood burning when it gets hot. Logic arts are just a way to mess with those rules directly. So if someone uses their power on a log and tells it to catch fire, the wood will just start burning on its own without needing a lighter or a spark. Emirus points out that logic arts use a person's natural energy to pay the cost for skipping the normal physical process, basically jumping straight to the result. The Silver Hero just sweats and nods along, realizing how it works. The White Priestess wonders if she could use it to freeze a piece of wood, but the Silver Hero tells her that while it isn't impossible, it would just take way too much energy to make it happen. The kid keeps testing the limits and asks about turning a regular apple into gold. He immediately shuts the idea down though, knowing it's impossible since it breaks the natural laws of the universe. Emirus takes a sip of her drink and tells the group she'll give them a better lesson on demon magic later on, mostly because she still wants to do a little more digging into it herself. She tells the kids to make sure they practice their communication arts and telepathy, since having extra ways to get a hold of people is always a good move, so she gives them a pretty suspicious look and says it's all great, assuming they can actually handle using the techniques correctly. The girl just smiles and laughs while saying that whether they can actually pull it off is a whole different story, which definitely doesn't help the group feel any more confident about their training. Later on, Alsar makes it out to a quiet spot in the woods and gets to work, tapping into a glowing magic grid to pull out all his supplies so he can start setting up. He begins putting his tent together and realizes he hasn't actually done this since the days they were hunting the Demon King, or maybe even way back during his basic military training. Alsar looks at his new setup and laughs, thinking about how boring those old army tents used to look. He's just glad that being unemployed finally gave him the time to put his own gear to use. Alsar hammers the last stake into the ground and thinks to himself that being unemployed isn't actually that bad. He takes a seat in his new camping chair, but he can't help wondering if those guys back at the palace are going to be okay. He thinks about how the king and prince have been spreading rumors everywhere about him being exiled, which is a huge mistake because, without him there, the kingdom doesn't look scary to anyone anymore, and he won't be there to help if they actually get attacked. Looking at the map, he knows that with the Demon King gone, countries are just going to start fighting each other again, even though his presence kept things peaceful for 10 years, mostly because he was basically a living ultimate weapon that no other nation wanted to mess with. He yells out that he could totally destroy a country or two if he really felt like it, but his stomach growls and immediately ruins his tough moment. So he gives up on the drama and decides it's finally time to get some food going. He points his finger at the pile of wood in his grill and just tells it to start burning. The fire catches instantly with a loud whoosh, getting the campsite nice and warm for the night. Alsar gets right to it, dropping thick slabs of bacon into the hot pan where they start popping and sizzling. He lets out a satisfied sigh and smiles, telling himself that this is exactly what he was craving. While the bread toasts on the grill, he cracks an egg perfectly over the bacon. The whole thing sounds amazing as it cooks, and he just sits back in his chair for a second, watching the steam rise from his breakfast while he waits. The finished product looks incredible, with a perfect sunny-side-up egg resting right on top of the crispy meat and toast. Alsar stares at the food with actual stars in his eyes, laughing a bit because he's so ready to dig in. He sits at his small table and gets ready to eat, debating with himself about which seasoning to use before deciding to just go with his gut. He takes a massive bite and looks like he's in absolute heaven, totally forgetting all his problems for a minute. As he eats, he thinks about reaching Alpha Dragoon tomorrow and how to handle meeting Emirus, but someone is actually watching him from the trees. The hidden observer blinks and realizes Alsar has completely vanished from the campsite in the blink of an eye. Alsar senses something nearby and knows it's not human. He felt a huge presence, but wonders if it was just a monster. He figures anything out there wouldn't dare get close after feeling his power, so it probably just wandered in from the demon territory, and he decides to just ignore it. Sitting back at his camp, he pulls up a screen to send a message, even though he's pretty sure he's going to get ignored again, so he sends it anyway. Thinking about how these private messages really bring back a lot of old memories for him. He looks at his hand and thinks about how he used to do stuff exactly like this even before he was a hero. But he realizes those memories are pretty much gone, so he just stretches and decides it's time for some coffee before he starts making dinner. He grinds his beans while the water boils on the portable stove. He pours the hot water over the grounds to fill his coffee mug. He takes a sip and relaxes while looking out at the quiet trees. He wonders if this is what people mean when they talk about living a slow life or just taking things easy for once. Alsar looks out over the horizon and decides it's time to finally see the world at his own pace. Back when he was busy taking down the Demon King, he traveled everywhere but never actually got to enjoy the view, and he's sure there are things he missed seeing when he was younger. He smiles, calling this new chapter his former hero wandering slow life journey. He finishes off his coffee and decides it's time to get moving, so he stands up and pulls on his gloves, thinking he might as well head out for a walk right now. While he's out, he figures if he runs into any decent monsters, he can just turn them into dinner. He walks through the brush, rustling leaves as he looks around. He mentions how quiet it is and that there's nothing around, but then he catches a glimpse of something behind the trees and thinks he found a beast. He stops in his tracks when he sees what's actually there. He goes quiet for a second, taking it all in before saying he understands what he's looking at. Standing right in front of him is a massive dark scale that's giving off a heavy vibe. He realizes the power he felt during dinner wasn't a monster nearby, but just the leftover mana from this scale, which means a great magic dragon is in the area. He walks away from the giant object, but the thought of a great magic dragon being so close stays stuck in his head. Later that night, he sits by his campfire wondering why a scale like that would be left out in the middle of nowhere. He can't tell if someone put it there on purpose or if it just fell off the dragon by accident. Alsar sits by himself, thinking about how empty the area seems. But then he spots some faint flickers in the distance and wonders if those are actually lights from a town. He realizes there must be a village nearby, and that dragon probably left its scale there as a marker, making the whole place a feeding ground so it can come back to hunt the people living there. He knows he's got to do something about it soon, but since he doesn't feel any monsters close by right now, he decides to just wait for morning. It makes sense why there aren't any other animals nearby since everyone's scared of the marking. So he just gets back to his cooking and sighs about his fresh meat being on hold. With his plate finally empty, he reaches for a drink to finish off the meal, taking a long, slow gulp and letting out a satisfied breath as he relaxes. He looks up at the massive spread of stars above his campfire, and the view is so clear it's reflected right in his eyes. He thinks about how people call the blue sky the azure vault, which makes this incredible night sky the Silver Vault. Alsar stares up at the sky, wondering if calling himself the hero of the night sky is a bit much. He starts laughing at his own old nicknames, thinking about how cool they felt back then, even if they're cringy now. He realizes he's probably just a little drunk and decides it's probably best to just call it a night and get some rest. He crawls into his sleeping bag and gets comfortable, drifting off into a deep sleep almost immediately. Suddenly, he hears someone calling his name and wakes up at a table, feeling completely out of it, and sees his old party standing right there. He's totally lost, asking what they're all doing here since he was just camping alone. But then he recognizes the room. The girls explain that Emirus used her magic to put this house inside a subspace in his tent, making the long journey way easier since he can just use the magic she taught him to visit whenever he wants. They all stand together, telling him he's always got a place to come back to. His eyes snap open as the morning light hits the camp. He stands up and stretches, thinking about what a throwback that dream was, and then he just takes a breath, telling himself it's time to get going. Alsar tells himself it's time to pack everything up and hit the road, making sure to grab all his trash since that's the main rule for any camper. His boots crunch against the dirt as he starts walking, and right then he picks up on a life sign nearby, so he follows the trail until he finds himself in a village of log cabins. He notices that the whole place is totally empty since it's so early in the morning, but he decides to head further in anyway, hoping he's not being too rude. Just then, he spots an old man standing by a bulletin board and walks over to say hello, calling out to get his attention. The old man turns around looking pretty surprised and asks Alsar who he is. So Alsar gives him a polite greeting, explaining that he's just a traveler and apologizing for the sudden intrusion. And the old man realizes he's just passing through and laughs it off, saying he was worried he was just losing his mind because he didn't recognize the face. Alsar just smiles and says, "Sorry for showing up out of nowhere." The old man asks how he even found this place, and Alsar tells him he saw some lights over here while he was camping nearby last night. The guy just stands there staring at Alsar like he's confused. The old man leans in and asks if he's really just a traveler, looking Alsar right in the eye while Alsar starts to panic a bit, wondering if his cover as a former hero is blown. But then the guy asks if he's actually back up from the Adventurers Guild. This just leaves Alsar more confused because he has no clue what that even is. So he thinks about how these adventurers are basically just people who hunt monsters or work as hired muscle to make a living. Alsar waves it off and explains he's got nothing to do with any guild, making the old man apologize for getting the wrong idea. The man admits he only asked because Alsar looks the part. Then he turns back toward the bulletin board and Alsar spots a missing poster of a young girl with pigtails and asks if she's the one they're looking for. Yet the guy gets a heavy look on his face and says the girl is actually his daughter, which really hits home when he explains she went out to grab some herbs 3 days ago and never came home. Alsar repeats the 3 days part to himself, his expression getting a lot more serious as he finally puts it all together, realizing this is exactly why the man reached out to the guild for help. Alsar mentions that he heard about the backup earlier and asks the chief if the adventurers have already arrived in town, and the old man confirms they're here from Alpha Dragoon. Alsar feels a bit of relief, thinking it's a good thing they aren't from St. Midrigal given his status as a fugitive, so the chief points toward a nearby log cabin and explains that the group is staying in one of the vacant houses for now. Alsar just stands there in total disbelief, wondering if the old man is actually serious about this because he knows they're up against a great demon dragon. That kind of monster usually takes at least 100 of his best soldiers to take down, yet only a handful of people showed up, making the odds look terrible. He tries to stay positive, thinking maybe these guys are just top-tier elites who can handle it alone. You're right then, the door to the house clicks open and a group of guys in mismatched armor finally steps out to meet them, but they don't exactly look like the heroes Alsar was hoping for. The guy in the lead just stands there, letting out a massive, lazy yawn like he's still half asleep. Then he spots the chief and gives a casual wave, shouting out a greeting and mentioning how early the old man is up. Alsar just stares at them with a totally blank look on his face, instantly realizing these guys are nothing but total scrubs. The village chief checks in on Davis to see if he slept okay, and the guy just shrugs it off, saying the bed was soft enough, even if the room was way too small for his liking. The old man starts apologizing for the crappy setup, but Davis tells him it's whatever since he wasn't expecting much from a backwater town anyway. He just wants to get the job over with so they can get out of there, while Alsar watches the exchange in silence. Davis doesn't seem to have a care in the world as he starts asking about what's for breakfast, but then he finally notices Alsar standing there with the chief. He points a finger right at him, demanding to know who this random guy is supposed to be. Alsar decides to play it cool to avoid any drama, putting on a fake smile and telling the group he's just a traveler passing through. Davis doesn't buy it for a second and gets immediately defensive. He repeats the word traveler like it's a joke, complaining that Alsar has a real attitude problem. He keeps poking at him, saying it's suspicious for a traveler to be walking around in such light gear. Alsar just keeps smiling, wondering how he could possibly be any more polite than he's already being. The guy keeps getting louder, demanding to know who Alsar really is, and calling him a jerk for just standing there, which finally snaps Alsar's patience. He moves so fast Davis can't react, grabbing him by the throat and pinning him back while telling the loudmouth he really needs to watch how he talks. The rest of the adventurer crew starts running over to help their leader, but Alsar just gives them a look that freezes them in their tracks, telling the whole group to shut up. Alsar keeps a tight grip on Davis, leaning in close to remind him they've never met and asking if the guy even knows what manners are. He tells him to start using polite speech with both him and the village chief, making it clear he expects some actual respect. Alsar suddenly realizes he's being a bit of a hypocrite considering how he treated the king, but he just laughs it off, saying that was a special case since the king was trying to execute him. He finally lets go, warning Davis that he won't be nearly as nice if there's a next time. Davis collapses to the ground while his crew screams out for their leader, but Alsar just looks back and tells the guy to have one of his friends use healing magic if it hurts that much. Davis can only groan in pain as he clutches his throat, but then the guy's ego gets the better of him. He snaps, jumping back up and screaming at Alsar like he's actually got a chance in a real fight. Alsar just sighs, saying he guess he has to show this guy where he actually stands in the food chain. Before Davis can even move, Alsar turns and lands a massive kick right into the guy's stomach. The power behind it is insane, sending Davis flying backward through the air as he coughs up spit, eventually skidding across the dirt until he stops. He just lies there twitching while the village chief and the rest of the adventurers watch on, totally speechless at how fast it ended. Alsar stands over him and tells him he's way too weak for this. He gives him some honest advice, telling the guy he should probably just go home before things get worse. Davis is face down in the dirt, fuming with rage. He can't believe what just happened, muttering about how Alsar is going to pay for humiliating him like this. Davis is back on his feet, but he's shaking like a leaf, completely terrified. Alsar watches him and thinks the guy actually has some guts for not giving up yet, but he's not about to say that out loud. The guy's ego still won't let it go, and he points a finger while screaming that he's memorized Alsar's face. He yells at him to remember this moment, but before he can even finish, Alsar moves in a total blur, flying across the space and snatching Davis right by the jaw. The guy's eyes go wide as Alsar's hand shuts him up mid-sentence, leaving him staring into a pair of cold, murderous eyes. Alsar leans in and asks if he forgot the warning, reminding him he said there wouldn't be a next time, and then he lets him have it. A brutal elbow strike connects right with Davis's mouth, shattering his teeth and sending blood spraying everywhere as the guy lets out a muffled scream, before Alsar follows up with a heavy kick that sends him spinning through the air. Davis is totally airborne, flying away from the house until Alsar finally lands back on the ground and slams the guy face first into the dirt. He pins him there while Davis just groans in total agony, and the whole village goes dead silent watching the mess. Alsar just stands up and casually starts dusting off his gloves like he's cleaning up a minor chore. He looks over at the rest of Davis's crew and asks if any of them want to step up and say something too. The entire group starts shaking in their boots and screams out a desperate apology, which Alsar figures is a good enough response. He tells them to get their healer over there to fix the guy up. One of the adventurers shouts that he's on it, rushing over to his boss while Alsar just stands there, completely finished with the drama. The adventurer healer gets to work right away, kneeling over Davis's broken body. The healing magic works fast, and the guys yell out that Davis is healed even if he's still totally knocked out. Alsar doesn't even look back, just walking away from the mess like it's just another Tuesday. Alsar spots the village chief hiding behind a wooden pillar, looking like he's seen a ghost. He calls out to the old man, who's still too shaken to move. The chief is literally vibrating with fear as he stammers out a response. Alsar looks at him and realizes he might have gone a bit too hard with the scary vibes. Remembering how he had to act back at the castle, he decides to drop the tough guy act and gives the chief a friendly smile, saying he finally understands what those reinforcements were all about. The chief just blinks, completely thrown off by how nice Alsar is being all of a sudden. Alsar tells the old man to just leave the whole situation to him from now on. The chief holds up his hands, totally confused and stuttering while trying to process the offer. But Alsar just puts a hand on his chest and tells him not to worry. He's got this, and he's not going to let anything bad happen to them. Later on, things calm down enough for everyone to grab a bite to eat. While chewing on some bread, Alsar asks if the village is called Little Shuvik. The chief admits it's a pretty big name for such a small mountain town. He serves up some hot soup to the group and explains that the place was actually founded by descendants of old noble families who lost their power a long time ago. One of the adventurers nearly chokes on his food, asking if the chief is one of those noble kids. The old man just nods and introduces himself as Joan Ludelschuvik before trying to move the conversation along. One of the younger adventurers looks over at Alsar, curious about what he meant by taking charge of the situation. Alsar just gives him a quick nod, getting ready to explain. Alsar mentions he found some dragon markings close by the day before. He tells the chief he's pretty sure those marks have something to do with his missing daughter, which makes the old man go quiet. He explains that the dragon is definitely going to show up to hunt the villagers sooner or later. Alsar says he's going to go kill the thing himself, even though the healer points out that's technically their job. Alsar doesn't miss a beat, telling them this isn't some normal monster. It's likely one of the 8 great dragon dukes. The adventurer with glasses almost chokes on his food just hearing the name. These guys are basically the top-tier royalty of the dragon world, coming from powerful bloodlines like the Flameflow or Black Steel Moon. And each one controls a different element. They were the heavy hitters in the Demon King's army, which means they're way out of anyone's league here. The adventurers start panicking, saying there's no way they can fight a dragon like that since they're only iron rank. Alsar just thinks to himself that they'd be snacks in about 2 seconds. Alsar turns his focus back to the village chief, his face getting real serious. He asks the old man to keep going with the story. Chief Joan looks down at the table, his voice trailing off as he tries to talk about his daughter. He looks like he's carrying the weight of the world. The old man finally admits she's been gone for 3 days straight. He gives a sad little smile, saying he's already braced himself for the fact that she might not be coming back. Joan remembers his daughter as the sweetest kid, always telling him to take a break because he worked too hard. She even went out to gather food in his place. And Alsar listens to the story while wondering why a dragon that massive would even bother coming into the human world. It doesn't really add up, so the blonde adventurer pipes up, asking if there wasn't some kind of deal where the demon and human realms just leave each other alone. Things are getting tense, but the 2 adventurers just whisper about how messy this looks and decide to let Alsar handle the heavy lifting. Meanwhile, Joan brings out more bread, and Alsar gives him a quick thanks as he focuses back on the task at hand. He's certain the dragon is going to show up again soon, and he's planning to be right there waiting when it does. The others are still pretty stressed, wondering exactly when this monster might appear. Alsar just gives them a confident smirk and tells them it's fine because he's already got a plan. A little later, Alsar starts heading for the door, telling everyone he's going to step out for a minute. He realizes he hasn't said goodbye to the chief yet, so he checks to see if the old man is still in the kitchen. He peeks in and sees Joan alone. Alsar stops in his tracks, looking out at the sky with a pretty frustrated expression. He lets out a heavy sigh, thinking about how if that king and prince had just banished him 3 days sooner, he might have actually been able to save the girl before the dragon got to her. Alsar stands out in the woods alone, staring at a massive crystal. He's just waiting for the right moment when he explains how, even if a piece is far away, it stays connected to the main body through a magic path, acting like a marker. He figures that if something happens to the scale, the main body is definitely going to feel it. Right as he finishes that thought, he jumps back just in time because the crystal gets completely smashed by something moving incredibly fast. Alsar stays on his toes as debris flies everywhere and a dark shape streaks across the sky. He looks up, realizing he's not alone anymore, and just then this massive wolf-like dragon crashes down right in front of him, towering over everything and looking completely feral. The monster gets right in his face, letting out a low, menacing growl that sounds like it's ready to rip him apart. So Alsar keeps his cool, looking the beast in the eye and asking if it's supposed to be a miasmagarm. He gestures at the beast, telling it that for something its size, it should be smart enough to actually speak. He tells it to quit the growling and try talking for once, but the monster doesn't have much to say. It just opens its mouth and lets out another deafening roar right at him. Alsar looks the massive beast right in the eye, telling it that it shouldn't underestimate him just because he's a human. And then the miasmagarm completely freezes up, making a shocked noise as it realizes there's something different about him. The monster demands to know who he actually is, so Alsar tells him it's a bit weird to use the name now. But he's the hero Alsar, which sends the beast into a total panic as it repeats his name, staring at him in disbelief. In the middle of the clearing, the dragon asks if he's really the guy who took down the Demon King, but Alsar just cuts him off before he can finish. Suddenly, the beast gets super polite and apologizes for being rude to Lord Alsar, asking why someone like him would even be out here. But Alsar just watches him, thinking about how fast this monster changed its tone once it realized who it was dealing with. He tells the dragon that's actually his line, because a noble-class dragon being in the human world is a huge deal, and he wants to know what it's doing here. The massive creature goes quiet, sitting down in the grass and losing all that scary energy it had before, So it tries to apologize again and start a formal introduction as a Black Dragon Duke. But Alsar tells him he really doesn't need to hear all that. Alsar doesn't look amused and tells the beast to just answer the question. He isn't in the mood for games since the dragon goes quiet for a second before bowing its head, admitting it's pretty embarrassing, but it basically just failed and lost its place, so it explains that their home world is brutal to anyone considered an outcast, leaving it with no choice but to run to the human world just to survive. Alsar looks at the ground, thinking they're actually kind of the same since they both lost everything, so he tells the dragon he gets it, and it must have been a rough time. The massive beast starts backing away, saying it knows it isn't supposed to be here and promises to leave the area right now. But Alsar tells it to hold on for a second, which makes the dragon stop in its tracks and ask if there's something else he needs. Yini with a serious look, Alsar asks the creature straight up if it recently ate a human around here. The two of them just stand there in the field. The dragon looks away, unable to even meet Alsar's eyes until it finally apologizes, admitting that Alsar is right and it couldn't handle the hunger anymore, so it attacked some of his people. The beast says it didn't realize who it was talking to and feels terrible for being so disrespectful right in front of the hero himself. The dragon tries to beg for its life, promising it'll never do it again and asking for a pass, but Alsar just shuts it down immediately, telling it no way. The beast looks confused for a second before Alsar steps up and tells it straight that it's time to pay for what it did. The dragon is completely caught off guard, and it starts lashing out, asking if Alsar is seriously going to try and take out a noble from the demon world, even if it is currently an outcast. The dragon warns him that he should know exactly what kind of mess that would start, and Alsar just looks back and says he knows exactly what he's doing. Since the war between humans and demons ended 10 years ago, even if it's a shaky truce, there's finally some peace in the world. The Demon King isn't in total control anymore, so the demon world has its own society now, meaning taking out a noble could turn into a massive international problem. The dragon agrees, saying they're supposed to be keeping this temporary peace, but Alsar just snaps back that he doesn't give a damn about any of that. When the beast points out that it already apologized for everything, Alsar tells it that saying sorry isn't going to fix what happened, and it gets even more heated when the dragon gets offended about bowing its head, while Alsar just calls it an oversized dog that thinks a simple apology is enough. Alsar just gives it this cold, killer look. The dragon is standing there shaking, realizing that the hero isn't playing around at all. Garm snaps back that it's only natural for them to eat humans. It's just the food chain, same as humans eating cows or pigs, and the beast even has the nerve to ask if Alsar isn't being a little dramatic over just one person's life, which leaves Alsar standing there in total silence. His whole body is shaking while he looks down at the ground. He finally speaks up, clenching his fist and saying he actually gets the logic. He'd probably be pretty annoyed if a cow tried to execute him for having a burger. Garm looks like it thinks it might actually get off the hook for a second, but then Alsar reminds the monster that they're currently standing in the human world. He thinks back to the village and how the village chief Joan was completely broken and crying in his own home because of what happened. Alsar cracks his knuckles and tells Garm that if you're going to kill and eat someone in their own territory, you have to be ready for them to hit back just as hard. His hand starts glowing with this insane amount of power as he tells the beast that, as the hero who saved humanity, he's not forgiving anything. He tells Garm to go ahead and try to resist if it wants, but he's going to crush it with everything he's got. Garm growls, showing off those massive fangs. It's clearly getting ready to snap, while Alsar stands there perfectly still. The beast is actually getting annoyed now. It asks how much longer this human thinks he can keep acting so high and mighty, and Garm tells Alsar to stop being so full of himself. He needs to remember his place as a lower life form. Alsar doesn't even flinch. He just gives a little smirk and says thanks, which completely catches the monster off guard. He keeps going, saying that since Garm is being such a jerk, he can actually feel good about killing him now, and the two of them just stand there in this tense standoff. The sheer size of the beast compared to Alsar is crazy. Garm finally loses it and lets out a roar that echoes through the whole forest. He takes flight, smashing through trees as he goes. Yet with his eyes glowing, Garm snaps back that Alsar is the one who's about to die. The killing intent is real. Alsar just tells him he can keep talking all he wants. He's ready for whatever the monster throws at him. Garm roars again and fires a massive blast of dark energy from the sky. It slams into the ground, causing a huge explosion right where Alsar was standing. Garm stands in the middle of the clearing, watching the smoke rise from his attack. He gives a little laugh and says it really wasn't much of a fight, assuming it's all over. But Alsar's voice comes right out of the smoke, asking if the beast is done yet. Garm is completely losing it, staring in shock as the smoke clears to show Alsar standing there with his arms crossed. Totally fine. The dragon is shaking, saying this shouldn't even be possible. Alsar just calls him an idiot and points out that if the Demon King's power couldn't kill him, there's no way a regular monster's breath would even leave a scratch. So he puts his hands together, getting into a serious stance. He tells the beast that since he's had his fun, it's finally time for his turn. Alsar launches himself forward with crazy speed, moving so fast the dragon can't even react. Garm just looks up as the hero closes the distance in a split second. As he closes in, Alsar tells him he really shouldn't have underestimated what a hero can do. He hits the monster with a massive strike that carves a giant X right through its body. Garm lets out one last weak sound before his huge frame gets completely wrecked, leaving Alsar to land safely as blood sprays everywhere. Standing over the remains, Alsar says there was never a chance the beast could win. He mentions that Garm should have had more respect for the Demon King he had to take down back in the day. He looks down, feeling a bit annoyed that even a high-level dragon couldn't grasp how strong he actually is. It's honestly kind of a pain being looked down on like that. Even after saving the world, Alsar realizes he's still the one stuck doing the chores. He starts using his magic to purify the whole area and stack up the fallen trees, getting everything back to normal. Alsar looks up at the sky, wondering if he's actually being looked down on a bit too much lately. The sun starts to set over the quiet mountain village. Everything looks peaceful as one of the villagers spots Alsar and yells for the chief, saying the traveler is finally back. Joan drops what he's doing, turning around to greet him. The villagers gather around, and Joan tells Alsar he's just glad to see him safe, but then the chief suddenly stops in his tracks. He stares at something behind Alsar, completely losing his words, and asks what that giant thing is. Standing right behind the hero is the massive, clean skeleton of the dragon, towering over the whole group. Alsar casually explains that this is the dragon they were worried about. Since it was full of poison, he mentions he went ahead and purified the body, leaving the rest of the villagers standing there in total shock. They can't even wrap their heads around the size of the beast. Joan looks at the bones, realizing this is the monster that took the life of the village girl. He looks pretty torn up as the truth hits him, so he gives Alsar a deep bow and thanks him for everything. Alsar just looks away and waves a hand, telling the chief it really wasn't a big deal. Alsar tells the villagers he's leaving the dragon skeleton for them. The bones are super sturdy and make great materials, so he suggests calling a city merchant to sell them. It won't bring back the girl they lost, but the money should help out, making Joan try to hand over a bag of gold as a reward. Alsar just waves his hand and says he doesn't need it, even though the adventurers in the back realize that was supposed to be their pay. Alsar tells the chief he's actually already got what he wanted, reaching into his storage to pull out a massive dark orb that fits right in his hand. He explains it's a dragon jewel from the beast's head, basically a giant rock made of pure magic power. Joan looks at it closely as Alsar warns him that it's actually pretty dangerous. If someone messes with it or leaves it alone, the magic could explode at any second. Since it's too much for the village to handle, he says he'll take it off their hands. Joan looks relieved and begs him to take it, but then Joan asks if he's really okay with such a dangerous reward. Alsar says it's fine, thinking it'll make a perfect gift for Emirus, while Davis stands nearby with his jaw on the floor, unable to believe how easily this legendary hero just handled everything. Davis stares at the dragon skull on the ground, pointing a shaky finger while asking if Alsar really took that thing down alone. But Alsar just reminds him that he tried to warn them earlier. If Davis and his crew had actually tried to fight it, they would have been killed instantly. So Joan tries to ask for the traveler's name as he starts to walk away. Alsar just waves a hand, saying he's not anyone special enough to mention, while Davis and his group just slump over in total defeat. As he heads out, Alsar thinks it's a relief that Davis didn't recognize him. He knows he has to disappear before any pursuers show up and cause trouble for the village. Yet Joan stops mid-sentence, hesitating as a realization starts to hit him. He tries to brush the thought away, but the village chief can't help but ask the question out loud. He wonders if this traveler is actually the legendary hero Alsar, who defeated the Demon King. Alsar stops in his tracks with a look of pure dread on his face. Joan gets even more excited, saying he knew it because Alsar looks exactly like the stories, making the hero realize his cover is totally blown. He admits he's been caught, thinking back to the time he actually did save the whole world, and the entire crowd goes wild. The woman calls him the Silver Hero while Davis completely loses his mind, unable to believe he was just talking trash to a legend. Alsar just laughs awkwardly and scratches his head, finally owning up to his identity now that the secret's out. Alsar strikes a grand hero pose, but the reaction from the crowd isn't what he expected. A woman asks if anyone actually knows him, while a guy in the back just asks who he's supposed to be, and the older man flatly says he's never seen him before, making the former hero freeze up completely. He stands there with a totally blank look on his face. letting out a confused noise as the realization that nobody recognizes him starts to sink in. The villagers just start whispering among themselves, trying to figure out what a hero or a demon king even is. Davis asks his crew if they've ever heard of a guy like that, and one of them even wonders if the village chief just mispronounced the word for monster, which really starts to freak Alsar out. He starts sweating bullets, thinking this can't be for real, while his brain just repeats a bunch of panicked thoughts over and over because he can't believe he's being treated like some weird myth or a monster. He looks completely crushed, while Joan just gives him this awkward, nervous smile to try and lighten the mood, but it doesn't help at all. Joan stammers a bit, asking if he really is that hero, and tries to find the right words to explain the situation as Alsar just stands there in silence. So Alsar ends up staring at the sky, wondering how his fame could have tanked this hard in only 10 years. He feels like a total idiot for being so stressed about his identity being leaked when nobody even cares. And Joan tries to apologize, explaining that the village is so far out in the sticks that they don't get much news from the outside world. Or Alsar just puts his hand up and tells them it's fine and not to worry about it, though deep down he's taking it pretty hard. He realizes he's officially reached has-been status, and that all his old achievements are just stories from the past that people have already forgotten. He starts wobbling away toward the forest, telling everyone he's done for the day. Davis watches him leave, still wondering who the guy actually was, while Joan calls out after the legendary hero as he disappears into the trees. Alsar sits alone on a rock by the stream, just chilling under the stars, and as he listens to the stream, he starts thinking about how fast time has been moving. He says it's actually kind of scary how quickly the years have gone by, especially since he realizes why everyone has been looking down on him lately. He admits to himself that he completely misjudged his own strength, thinking back on the prince, the king, and even that dragon, and wonders if he's the one who messed up. He thinks that since he was always holding back his power to keep from wrecking the place, he might have accidentally made everyone think he just got weak. So he stands there looking back at his life since the Demon King went down. He figures since he hasn't done anything huge lately, it makes sense people forgot him. But then he wonders if a fight that big could really just vanish from everyone's heads like that. He starts thinking about his old teammates and wonders if they know their legacy is basically gone too. He jokes to himself that if he ever runs into them again, he'll have to break the news that they're all has-beens now, which leads him to an old saying about being a prodigy as a kid and a genius at 15. He sighs, thinking that once you hit 20, you're supposed to just be a normal guy. But deep down, he knows that doesn't apply to people like them. He realizes that no matter how many years pass, they can never truly go back to being just regular people. Even though he stares up at the moon and admits that if he actually had the choice to be normal again, he'd take it in a heartbeat. He sits there in the silence of the night, and back at a building nearby, a digital message pops up on a screen. Someone sends a note to Alsar saying they're coming over to visit him soon, and a hand points right at the text. Emirus is slumped over in the library, totally wiped out with magic marks still glowing on her face. She just sighs and stares into space, looking like she hasn't slept in days, while the story moves over to the West Town where the Alpha Dragoon guys hang out. It's a busy place with flying beasts everywhere, and right in the middle of it, Alsar is standing at a rental stall checking out the morning paper. The old guy behind the counter is busy getting things ready, so Alsar takes a second to look through the headlines. He's actually surprised because he doesn't see a single word about him being kicked out of the country, and he realizes the kingdom is being pretty slow to react. He thinks to himself that this is actually perfect, since it means he can move around without any trouble. And then the clerk calls out to him, saying his ride is finally good to go. Alsar looks up just as a beast starts flapping its wings nearby, and a huge griffin lands right in front of him. It looks pretty intense, but Alsar just walks up to it like it's nothing and starts petting the griffin to get on its good side. He tells the beast he's counting on it to get him all the way to the royal capital, and next thing he knows, they're way up in the clouds. He looks down at the world passing by, thinking about the quick nap he managed to snag before taking off, and it doesn't take long before they're dropping down into the capital. The griffin sticks the landing right in the middle of a busy street, kicking up a bunch of dust. Alsar waves goodbye to the griffin as it flies back into the sky. He says thanks for the ride and watches it go, finally standing in the middle of the capital after the long trip. He stretches his arms, thinking he could have just teleported in a second, but then reminds himself that you've got to actually enjoy the journey. So he looks up at the massive Alpha Dragoon castle sitting right in the center of everything. There's a huge crowd gathered at the front gates, and he just blends in with the commoners, walking right past the guards and through the stone archway like he belongs there. Moving on, Alsar pulls up a magic screen to check his messages. He says Emirus' name out loud, feeling a bit annoyed that she saw his text but never actually messaged him back. Why, he remembers her saying she was doing magic research in a workshop a few years back, so he checks a photo of the place on his screen. He wonders if she's even still around there, or where the building is specifically, until he looks up and realizes he's standing right in front of the exact same brick building from the photo. He holds the screen up to make sure it's a match, and walks up to the front door and gives it a few loud knocks. He stands there waiting for a bit, but the whole place is completely quiet, leaving him deciding to just let himself in since nobody is answering. He pushes the door open and announces he's coming in, but his face goes totally blank the second he sees what's inside, and he just loses it, asking what the heck is even going on. The entire room is packed with bubbling flasks and weird machines making all kinds of noise. It's a total mess. Alsar walks through the lab and notices all the magic being used to keep the place running on its own. He wonders if she's just that good now, or if her sloth trait is making her automate everything. He looks around and realizes the floor is totally empty, so he keeps moving until the sound of his boots hitting the stone steps leads him right to her. He stops and says he finally found her, and with a big smile on his face, he gives a casual wave and says, "It's been a really long time," finally standing face to face with Emirus. She's just sitting there with a book in her lap, looking exactly like he remembers. So she looks up and casually asks if that's really Alsar standing there. He looks a little awkward as he tells her that's a pretty weak greeting for someone who's been waiting for a text back. He says she should have at least messaged him, but she just says she's sorry and that replying was way too much work. Alsar stops for a second and gets a good look at her, putting his hand to his chin. He looks pretty shocked and asks her if she seriously hasn't grown a single inch, because she looks almost identical to the girl he knew 10 years ago. It's like time just stopped for her, and he realizes that's why he knew it was her the moment he walked in. Emirus isn't feeling the comments, though, and she gives him a sharp glare, telling him he's being super rude. He just brushes it off, saying that unlike her, he's actually grown up a ton over the last decade. Emirus tries to prove her point by shouting that she actually has grown if he'd just look closer. She gets so worked up that she trips and drops her book, and Alsar watches her fumble and sarcastically tells her how impressive that was. He looks at her with a sweat drop, asking what she even meant by that, but Emirus just looks away and says, it was actually a lot more than she expected. She gets all quiet and won't finish her thought, so Alsar tells her she can't just stop right at the interesting part. Emirus says she'd rather complain about him first, but Alsar keeps pushing to know what she was thinking, and he lets out a smug little laugh like he's already figured out what's on her mind. He looks pretty pleased with himself, asking her if the real issue is just that he's gotten way more handsome than she ever expected him to. Emirus just gives him a blank look while she tells him his personality has really gone to crap. She wonders if the pride and greed traits are just rotting his brain. Her words hit him like a physical blow, so she keeps going, saying it's incredibly rude to talk to a lady about being a flat-chested brat. Alsar tries to defend himself by saying he never used those exact words, but she just tells him it's the same thing, and she looks him right in the eye with a disappointed sigh. She asks him why he couldn't have just been a normal guy and told her she's gotten pretty, but she finishes by saying he still has absolutely no tact at all. Alsar just rubs his head and tells her that her mouth is just as bad as his. Emirus points out that Alsar has been acting pretty cruel himself lately. She shrugs like it's a mystery, while Alsar just stands there looking stressed out by the comment, and she leans in close with a little smirk on her face, just staring him down. Looking at her from this close, Alsar can't help but think about how she hasn't aged a day since he last saw her. He knows she's supposed to be 24 now, so he figures her crazy amount of mana must be the cause. But Emirus explains that when you store too much magic, it actually stunts your physical growth. On top of that, she says their factors make it so they just stop aging entirely once they reach a certain point. So she tells him she is actually growing. It's just happening incredibly slowly. Alsar seems pretty surprised to hear that's how it works. And she reaches her hand out toward him to make another point, telling him that he's probably going to stop growing pretty soon too. Alsar just keeps his arms crossed and listens as she starts breaking down their connection, and she looks him in the eye and says she represents the traits of sloth and cruelty. Moving on, she points out that Alsar is the one carrying pride and greed, while she finishes by saying Nineveh is the one who represents envy and wrath. Emirus keeps the explanation going, mentioning how Sharad is the one who represents gluttony and lust, while noting they chose traits that clashed with their real personalities to stop the factors from taking over. She reminds him they only took them in to beat the Demon King, and points out a side effect that keeps their bodies stuck in their prime. She says it's about that time for the three of them, which makes Alsar remember hearing that before. She stops for a second, asking him straight up if he's felt like those factors have been trying to take over his mind lately. Alsar tells her he hasn't felt anything like that, so she says that's good, but she still looks pretty serious as she warns him about housing pride and greed in his body. She says if they start acting up, they'll make him way more aggressive than usual, so she tells him to just be careful. Alsar says he will as he starts to head off through the library, But then she asks why he actually showed up so suddenly, especially since they haven't even been in touch lately. She gives him a little smile and asks if he just got lonely and wanted to see her. Alsar puts his hand up and tells her she's way off base. Emirus looks at him closely and asks if she was wrong about him being lonely. She turns her back to him, asking if he's actually mad before telling him to just hurry up and explain himself. Alsar stands there looking a bit stressed, insisting that he isn't mad at all and tries to figure out how to start the story. He tells her it's a long one, but then takes it back, worried she won't get the point if he cuts too much out. Emirus just tells him to get on with it, so Alsar just gives it to her straight. He explains that since they were planning to execute him, he decided it was time to quit his job. Emirus just nods like it's no big deal and says she gets it now, which makes Alsar lose it. He tells her she shouldn't just accept that and needs to show a little more shock, but she says she actually is surprised, mostly by how brain-dead the leaders of his country must be. She leans back and mentions it's a pretty dark joke to play on someone who literally saved everyone. She looks him in the eye and notes that they're basically monsters at this point, so it's not really a shock that normal people are terrified of them. Then she asks if he ended up trashing the castle or if they just kicked him out of the country. Alsar is totally caught off guard and asks how she could possibly know that happened, so she uses her hair to grab some books while explaining it's just a simple guess. She tells him the old Alsar wouldn't have been that violent, but since the factors are living in him now, she bets things got pretty crazy the second they tried to put him to death. Alsar is really starting to sweat now. He realizes she's onto him, thinking about how he was actually looking for some payback, and she doesn't stop there. Emirus keeps going, saying he probably wrecked everything nearby and then went for the castle just to make a point, which makes Alsar realize just how easy he is to read. The truth is, the army totally gave up on killing him and just tossed him out. And while Alsar is busy trying to convince himself to just tell everyone he retired to save face, he finally cuts her off. He tells her she was right about some of it, but he's clearly struggling to keep his story straight, so he doubles down. He claims he isn't embarrassed about being kicked out at all and keeps swearing that he actually quit on his own, but Emirus doesn't look like she's buying it. She casually asks if he got a retirement bonus then, and Alsar actually brags about it. He flashes a peace sign and tells her he walked away with 2 billion plus a bunch of loot from the vault. Emirus is completely shocked by the flex. She can't believe this is the same selfless guy she used to know and calls him out for being greedy, which just makes Alsar even more annoyed. She gets quiet for a second, wondering if this new rude side of his is actually just the greed factor changing who he is. Then she mentions she should probably check herself too in case her own personality is shifting, but Alsar tells her she's already way past that. She's been leaving him on read this whole time, so she tries to play it off by saying she meant to reply and just forgot, but Alsar isn't having it and tells her she's basically the worst. Emirus just stands there pouting, looking pretty annoyed about the whole situation until Alsar tells her that if he's rude for ghosting, she's just as bad for showing up with nothing. But then he remembers something and pulls out a dark sphere, telling her it's a souvenir from the miasma Garm dragon he fought. Emirus leans in close to get a better look at the core. It's like she's completely forgotten about their argument, and she starts to realize exactly what kind of rare item she's holding. She takes it from him, saying it's perfect research material and that she's actually really happy about it. Then she looks up at him with a huge smile and says, "Thanks." Alsar looks a little caught off guard by her being nice for once and just gives a casual reply. But Emirus starts geeking out immediately. She begins rambling about how dragon cores process mana until Alsar has to tell her to calm down because she's getting way too excited. She gets grumpy again, telling him he should at least listen since she hasn't talked to anyone in ages, but Alsar just tells her to stop being such a baby. Emirus pouts with her cheeks puffed out, telling Alsar that she's just a kid and that it should be obvious to him just by looking at her. She's so annoyed that she just flops over and turns her back on him. Alsar starts to panic, realizing he might have actually messed up. He puts his hands up and says he's sorry, telling her to stop sulking because he'll actually listen now. He even admits he only brought the gift to see her happy. Emirus just sighs and looks up at the ceiling, muttering to herself that Alsar really hasn't changed a bit since the old days. Alsar misses what she said and asks for a repeat, but Emirus just sits up with a much better mood. She tells him that she's decided to forgive him. She holds onto the dragon core and says that since he's apologizing, she wants him to do her a favor. She asks if he can stick around for a little while and help her out with something. Alsar tells her that's fine, but he wants to know exactly what he's getting himself into. She gets all excited and explains that she wants to run a mana generation experiment. She's planning to use the core he brought to see if she can create actual energy. Alsar looks a bit worried and says the experiment is fine, but he asks her to promise she won't end up destroying the rare core. Emirus just gives him a quick nod. She winks and gives him a thumbs up, telling him it'll be totally fine, even though Alsar still looks like he doesn't quite trust her with the expensive souvenir. Alsar repeats the words, mana generation experiment, like he's trying to wrap his head around it, while Emirus decides it's time to move and tells him they should head outside. She snaps her fingers and a massive flash of light hits them both. Before Alsar even knows what's happening, they're standing in a field. He's pretty annoyed and tells her she should really warn a guy before teleporting him like that. Emirus just laughs and says she's sorry, but she just got a little too excited to get things moving. She looks pretty relaxed sitting there on her giant floating book. Alsar notices something different and asks about her hair. She tells him she cut it shorter since it's just a hassle to deal with outside. He then asks if sitting on a book is rude to the author. Nah, but she just smiles and says it's fine since she's the one who wrote it, making Alsar wonder if that's actually how it works. He looks around at the empty grass and asks where they are. Emirus tells him they're still on the castle grounds, not too far from her workshop. Alsar thinks it's a weird spot for an experiment, but she says the empty space is perfect for what she has planned. She points a finger up and drops some knowledge, explaining that the dragon core is actually the third most important organ for generating mana. Emirus starts breaking down the details, telling Alsar there's one major thing that sets these two apart. She gives him a look and asks if he can figure out what it is, and Alsar doesn't miss a beat. He tells her he already knows this one, explaining that while the heart and furnace are natural parts inside the body, a dragon core is a separate, inorganic thing that stays on the outside. Watching her get all into the explanation, Alsar realizes she's just looking for any reason to give him a lecture. He can tell she just really loves being the one with all the answers, but it turns out it's a pretty rare thing. While every creature from the demon realm has those basic organs, only a few specific types of dragons actually carry a core around with them. Emirus adds that these cores are basically indestructible since they don't rot or break down over time. Even if the dragon itself dies, the core stays right there, totally intact and ready to use, which leads to a bit of a catch. She reaches out toward the floating sphere and explains that it needs a specific trigger to actually start working at its full potential. Alsar asks what kind of trigger she's talking about, and instead of answering, she just shows him. She focuses her energy and blasts a wave of magic straight into the core, making the whole thing start to pulse and glow with light. She tells him to check it out as it powers up. The trick is to give it a little mana jumpstart, and once it's running, it starts pulling in energy from the air to keep producing its own mana. Alsar looks at the glowing orb and points out a flaw. He asks why a mana generator would need mana, just to get it moving. Emirus gets a huge grin on her face and tells him that's a perfect question, and she leans in close with a look of pure excitement. She starts to explain the secret, reminding him that since the core is inorganic and made outside the body, it works differently than anything else they've seen. Emirus gets all fired up, clenching her fists while she explains that for this core to even exist, it needs to be based on a dragon's heart and furnace. She looks at Alsar and breaks it down like a science lesson. She explains that the core is basically just a third organ for making mana, which is why it needs a jumpstart to get going. The crazy part is that even if the dragon dies, the core just keeps running as long as it has a supply, and that changes everything. Right now, this kind of heavy mana is only found in the demon realm, but with these cores, she says anyone will be able to get those same magic benefits no matter where they are. She sits back on her giant book and asks if he realizes the scale of what she's saying. Alsar starts to put the pieces together in his head, but he still asks her what exactly is going to happen next. Emirus throws her arms wide with a huge grin, shouting about how the whole world is going to be overflowing with mana. She's convinced that magic research is going to explode everywhere once this happens. But Alsar doesn't look as hyped. He stops her for a second to point out how things actually work, explaining that it's not like the demon realm just has mana, and then demons show up. He tells her that the land is actually filled with mana because the demons' bodies are constantly producing it themselves. Emirus is caught totally off guard by him knowing that, but just as she starts to react, the core starts making this heavy, thumping sound. It begins to pulse with a dark energy, and Alsar can't help but stare at the thing as it starts acting weird. Our Emirus doesn't seem bothered and keeps going, mentioning that if demons move to a new land, the Demon King will just be reborn there too. She thinks they can use this core to actually predict where he'll pop up next. Meanwhile, the core is literally sucking the life out of the grass around them. Alsar tries to get her to slow down because this is getting way too intense, but she's on a roll. She tells him there's no time to wait and that he needs to pay close attention to what she's about to say. Emirus starts rambling about her research on the dragon core, but Alsar puts a hand on her head. He tells her to hold on for a second because Emirus looks confused for a moment, wondering what's wrong. But then her face goes pale as she realizes she messed something up. A massive explosion rips through the forest in the distance, sending smoke and debris high into the air. Back at the academy, the tall white towers stand still as the sound of the blast reaches the campus. The soldiers standing guard outside freak out, asking what that noise was. Emirus tells them it's finally starting and they need to do exactly what she told them, even though some of the guys are hesitant about her plan. She doesn't want to hear it and barks out that it's an order. The soldiers jump, looking completely terrified of her. Well, they all shout back that they understand and immediately start running to their positions as fast as they can. Back in their conversation, Emirus explains that mana is basically a power that breaks the rules of the world, while reason is the power that follows them. She mentions there's actually a third force called holy power. She describes holy power as the ability to make things follow natural logic, noting it's the same energy Nineveh used to use. Alsar realizes that Nineveh's power can neutralize magic, so he tries to interrupt. But Emirus tells him to be quiet. She's not done with her lecture yet. Emirus sighs and starts going on about how it's a total shame Nineveh isn't around to see this. She explains that if Nineveh had been there, the gift wouldn't have turned into such a disaster, and she's really feeling bummed about the whole thing. Alsar just stares her down with a completely blank face, eventually asking her if she has anything else to say for herself. The girl stops her dramatic act and just looks down, looking super guilty and sad as she mumbles a quiet apology while they sit together on the roof. Alsar turns his back to her and looks out at the distance, saying he's just glad nobody actually got hurt. He points out that the whole area out there is now covered in some really heavy mana, but Emirus brushes it off, explaining that the human world doesn't have much mana to begin with, so it'll all just fade away into the air eventually. She does admit it's probably going to suck for the local plants, but she says the whole experience actually taught her a lot. She realizes now that dragon orbs are way more dangerous than she thought, though Alsar is quick to remind her that she was the one saying everything would be fine just a few minutes ago. Emirus keeps explaining, saying that because she has so much power, the orb went out of control when she touched it. She points out that most people don't have her level of mana, so for a normal person, it probably wouldn't have blown up at all. She starts waving her arms around in a panic, yelling that this was a huge discovery and his gift was actually super helpful. But Alsar just tells her to stop trying so hard to cover for her mistake. He looks out at the water and mentions that having too much mana definitely seems like a problem. He asks her what she thinks they should do to fix things next time, making Emirus stop and think for a second. She holds up a finger and reminds him that mana is basically like poison to regular people, and even in this place, you need serious training before you can even think about handling magic. Emirus closes her eyes and really starts getting into the theory side of things. She admits they can't change how things are right now, but she thinks that one day, people won't have to use their own bodies to control mana, which kind of catches Alsar off guard. He was just looking for some quick tips on how to fix their experiment, but she's already moving on to explaining the entire philosophy behind it, making the point that handling mana shouldn't just be something only mages can do. She keeps her explanation going, telling him that the real future is all about magic tools like rings and potions. She looks pretty confident about it, pointing out that the natural way for things to progress is for people to rely on gear, because magic tools have a massive advantage that normal magic just can't touch. She explains that these items basically let you ignore the standard rules of the world, and it makes the whole process way easier than trying to learn complicated logic-based spells. Since there are fewer steps involved in the creation process, it means they can finally start mass-producing this stuff. Emirus thinks that's the real game changer because then even regular people who don't know the first thing about magic could use them, which would make them spread everywhere. But she notes they definitely have to find a way to make the tools smaller if they want them to be popular. She starts to say something else and waves her hand, and then, suddenly, all these sharp crystals start raining down from the sky. They're just standing there as the area gets covered in these weird falling objects, and Alsar just watches one of the shiny rocks float right past his face. He's completely lost and asks her what the deal is with these things. Emirus watches the sky as the crystals fall, explaining that these things are actually shards of the dragon jade. She wonders if the crushed pieces can still produce mana, or if they can be processed, because if it works, magic tools are finally happening. Emirus points right at him with a big smile, saying she's going to get every bit of use out of the souvenir he brought her. Alsar thinks they've finally hit a good stopping point and decides to just give some generic replies to wrap things up, so he just nods along. Just as he thinks he's done, Emirus raises her hand and says she has one more thing to mention, and even though he's sweating a bit from the long talk, Alsar figures he might as well stick around and listen for a bit longer. Emirus brings up a hologram and admits she was just trashing theory-based magic, but it actually has some perks, explaining that while the formulas have to be perfect for the spell to even work, that precision is exactly what makes the magic so strong. Alsar asks if that means standard magic is just weaker and more prone to breaking, and she tells him that's the deal. It's the reason magic tools are usually limited to really simple spells. It's the only way to keep the logic from falling apart. Emirus explains that even if you ignore the standard rules, you can still get some basic results. She points out that while logic and holy power work, mana is way better for making stuff since it's cheaper and easier to mass produce. Emirus admits she can't even use holy power and would need Nineveh's help for that, while Alsar starts hoping for a break. The lecture finally stops when Emirus lets out a long sigh, making Alsar ask if everything is okay. She just laughs it off and says she got carried away talking because she's so happy they finally met up again. Alsar catches her smiling and figures, if she's having this much fun, the long talk was worth it. But then he suddenly stops and catches a scent in the air, looking around with a confused expression. Alsar asks if she smells something burning, which catches Emirus completely off guard. She points out that the explosion from earlier didn't have any fire, so there's no reason for a burning smell. But Alsar looks even more certain now, telling her there's definitely something wrong. Alsar looks out toward the horizon and spots a thin trail of smoke. He points it out to Emirus, who looks over and realizes exactly where that smoke is coming from. She completely loses it, screaming that the fire is coming right from her workshop, so she snaps her fingers and teleports them both directly to the scene, where they find the entire building covered in massive flames, burning way too fast. Alsar looks at the wreckage and realizes this was magic. Someone definitely set this place on fire on purpose. He turns to Emirus and tells her they need to put it out right now, but they both freeze when they hear a group of guys running up, yelling about a witch being nearby. A bunch of soldiers show up and point right at Emirus, shouting that the witch finally showed her face, which just makes Alsar look at them like they're the biggest idiots he's ever seen. Alsar jumps in and tries to get the soldiers to back off, telling them to just wait a second. He points out that these guys are clearly the ones who burnt the place down, but Emirus just says she's well aware, and she looks him right in the eye, telling him to just step back and let her handle this her way. Alsar gives in, but warns her not to go too crazy. She says she's got it, as she floats toward the soldiers on her giant book. The soldiers completely lose it and start screaming for everyone to get ready because she's already starting to chant. But Emirus just looks at them and asks if they even have a single clue about what they've actually done. Suddenly, the guys start dropping like flies, hitting the dirt and groaning while they wonder what's happening to them. She watches her workshop burn and tells the guys on the ground that she was literally making medicine and potions for them there. Yet they went and destroyed everything, including a basement full of rare books meant to help people in the future. Emirus explains those books were full of hope from researchers who didn't want their life's work to just disappear. Emirus stares down at the soldiers groveling in the dirt, telling them they didn't just burn a building, they destroyed people's hopes and every dream those researchers had, which in her eyes is a crime worth dying for 10,000 times over. She calms down just a bit, realizing that killing them won't actually bring back the books that already turned to ash. So she decides to just ask one question. She wants to know who's paying them, and warns that things are going to get ugly if they stay quiet. The guys don't say a word at first, so Emirus just shrugs it off and decides she's done being patient with them. She uses her hair like giant tentacles to snatch one of the soldiers right off the ground, sending the guy into a total panic. She leans in and asks him what he thinks would happen if she just kept hitting him with attack spells and healing him back up. The soldier starts losing his mind as the pain kicks in, screaming at the top of his lungs while Emirus watches with a blank stare. He finally cracks and yells out that it was Princess Morgana. She's the one who gave them the orders to come here and destroy everything, because she told them they would find a traitorous witch hiding out in the middle of nowhere. Alsar stands there looking pretty confused while the soldiers grovel on the ground, and he repeats the words, "Witch of Rebellion," under his breath as Emirus sits on her flying book, wondering if she's really a witch. But then one of the soldiers yells out that the explosion at the castle was definitely her work. Alsar doesn't say it out loud, but he thinks to himself that while the rebellion stuff sounds fake, he can't really argue about the explosion part, since Emirus is busy being annoyed at how fast they were judged, questioning why the military would just raid a workshop without thinking first. She decides they should just go find the person in charge and ask them directly, then tells Alsar it's time to go, which leaves the soldier on the ground, stuttering out the name, Alsar, as if he just realized who he's looking at. The guy finally loses it and screams out, "The Silver Hero?" But Alsar just gives a casual nod, thinking it's hilarious the guy didn't notice him standing there this whole time. The soldier starts shaking, realizing the queen wasn't lying after all. He's convinced the hero is getting the old team back together for something way worse, like a plot to take over the whole world. Even as Alsar and Emirus start walking away, Alsar just gives him a blank look and asks, "Huh?" having absolutely no clue where this crazy world domination idea is even coming from. Emirus asks what kind of story that's supposed to be, but Alsar quickly waves his hands. He says he has no clue, and the whole thing has nothing to do with him, though Emirus gives him a suspicious look and asks if he's actually part of their group. Alsar loses it and yells that it's just a big misunderstanding. He tells her to use some common sense for a second. He just stands there by himself and lets out a long, tired sigh. The situation is getting way more complicated than he wanted. Alsar realizes the princess is definitely the one behind all these rumors. He gets pretty annoyed, thinking maybe he should go back to the country and shut her up one more time. Alsar decides he's probably going to have to meet this queen person after all. So Emirus tells him they should just get a move on, but the soldier on the ground won't let it go, yelling at them to wait because he can't let them reach the castle. He tries to rally his men, shouting for everyone to get back on their feet. Emirus isn't having it and simply tells them they don't need to come along. Just then, a massive blast of pressure hits the soldiers, knocking them all flat. She floats there on her book, with her hand raised while the soldiers shake on the ground. Alsar watches her and says, "That's probably enough for now." He asks if she'd just use some kind of magic pressure wave on them. Emirus just acts casual about it, saying it was something like that. The lead soldier looks completely desperate and starts shaking. He growls that since it's come to this, he has no choice. He reaches for a signal gun while Alsar and Emirus look on. The lead soldier doesn't hesitate and fires his signal gun into the air. A bright trail of light streaks up as Alsar and Emirus watch it go, realizing the flare has already burst high above the trees. It's a clear signal to the rest of the army. Alsar mutters that he really let his guard down, while the soldier collapses on the ground, saying he's got no regrets now that he's alerted the others. Suddenly, loud alarms start ringing all over the city. The sound is everywhere, and you can see soldiers starting to scramble from every building to surround them. Alsar rubs his head, looking pretty stressed as he says it feels like the whole place is on high alert. Emirus just looks at him and asks what he's planning to do, but Alsar starts losing it, pointing out that security all the way to the castle is going to be way too tight now. Emirus doesn't seem to care at all, just giving him a bored whatever in response, which reminds Alsar of a time back in the day. He remembers her asking if there was actually any change in what they had to do. He thinks back to when they were younger, sitting around and feeling the weight of their mission. He'd asked if they could even beat the Demon King since it seemed impossible, but she just looked at him and asked, "So what?" She'd stood her ground and told him they were going to defeat the Demon King regardless, asking if his fear changed their actual goal. Back in the present, Alsar just smiles and tells her they have no choice but to keep moving forward, thinking to himself that she really hasn't changed at all. Alsar decides that running away isn't an option anymore, telling her they're going straight to the queen's place without letting anything stop them, and Emirus just laughs and calls him a weirdo, though she agrees with the plan while looking pretty amused by the whole situation. She tells him it's time to move, and Alsar gives her a quick nod as they start heading toward the massive castle towers in the distance. Down at the main entrance, a whole squad of soldiers is already lined up with spears, waiting for them in front of the broken doors. But as soon as the duo shows up, the lead soldier yells that they're here and orders the men to attack immediately. The soldiers don't stand a chance, as a massive blast just clears the entire hallway, sending everyone flying back while Alsar and Emirus walk through like it's nothing. Alsar thinks to himself that no matter how many guards they bring out, this kind of security is totally useless against the two people who actually saved the world. Emirus seems confused, asking why these guys even bother standing in their way, and if they really don't realize how pointless it is to fight them. Alsar looks over and tells her they probably just don't know who they're messing with. Specifically, they have no idea what she's capable of. She finds that hilarious, and asks how they could forget the Azure Mage who defeated the Demon King, especially since it's only been 10 years. Emirus keeps acting like it's the most obvious thing in the world, while Alsar just sighs and tells her she's right. They really are just people from the past now. They leave a trail of unconscious guards behind them in the hallway, and Emirus wonders aloud where the queen is hiding while Alsar tries to remember the way. Looking out at the distant peaks, it hits him that the demon world is sitting right behind those mountains. Just a reminder of everything they've been through. Alsar thinks to himself that this place is actually a pretty famous tourist spot, and he should probably come back for a real visit once this mess is over. But Emirus cuts his daydreaming short by waving him over, so he asks if she even knows where they're going, only for her to casually admit she has no clue. She explains her plan is just to keep heading toward the heaviest security, figured that's the fastest way to run into the queen or the king anyway. Alsar starts to follow her logic, but then he hears a faint beeping sound that stops him in his tracks. It's night in the castle grounds. He looks toward a tall pillar nearby, sensing that someone is definitely watching them from over there. Moving on, they sprint toward the next set of big doors where a whole squad of guards crosses their spears, yelling that they aren't letting anyone pass. The doors get blown wide open and Emirus just strolls in with a cheerful wave, acting totally casual while the guards she just wrecked are scattered all over the floor. Alsar and Emirus finally make it into the massive throne room, which is packed with soldiers lining both sides, all of them standing at attention as the two walk toward the far end. The guards are caught off guard by how fast they moved, and before anyone can react, Emirus just floats right up to the royal platform on her book with Alsar right beside her. Emirus doesn't seem bothered by the tension at all, just giving a casual hello like she's visiting an old friend while the king stands tall beside the throne. But the queen stays seated, looking completely over it and pretty much radiating pure annoyance. The guy standing there is King Drake, the ruler of the kingdom, and he just stares them down with a heavy look on his face. Next to him is Queen Morgana, and she looks even more ticked off than her husband. He's just sitting there with a sharp glare that shows Alsar realizes these are the people in charge, thinking to himself that the queen looks incredibly angry, almost exactly like how Jayakosa was acting before. But then he spots the star-shaped earrings she's wearing and his heart nearly stops. He recognizes that jewelry immediately, and it changes everything.